We decided to write this book back in 2015 when there was that measles outbreak in California. And we were just dispirited from it because we saw measures being brought forth that were highly questionable and seemed to be encroaching upon freedom.
If you look at the story of Daniel, especially Daniel 1, and the fact that he and his friends purposed in their heart that they would not defile themselves with the king's table. And what you have to understand is this, is that while the science of the day said you should eat a particular diet, Daniel and his friends said, we don't care about that, we need to be faithful to God. Mind you, they'd already lost their names, they had already lost their dress, they had already lost most of their identity. They had to learn a new language, new whole way of thinking. But one of the things they wouldn't do is they would not compromise what God had said should go into their bodies. And because of that, they made a stand. Now they did it prayerfully, they did it kindly, but they still were firm on it. And so when we examined the story, we felt, well, this is how we should be looking at this issue. We should be standing for conscience. We should support Daniel and his friends, and we should support all believers who have problems with mandatory vaccines. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to examine what the Bible says, what Ellen White says, the actual evidence from that, history. We wanted to look at Adventist history. And this is where we get to the letter of D.E. Robinson, because we begin to see this trend really with him in 1931.
Yeah, 1931, you notice that people are writing in and they're questioning about vaccination. And to eschew this type of fear that people were reading Ellen White's writings and arriving at conclusions about vaccination, Arthur L. White draws back on the writings of D.E. Robinson, or some of the ideas from D.E. Robinson. And there's this claim that's made that there was an outbreak in her time period and that she ended up getting a vaccine. However, we decided to look at the history because this is something that people proclaim often in order to promote vaccination among Seventh-day Adventists. But what we ended up finding when we were doing our research is that when you go back to 1915, you had people asking some of these same exact questions about vaccination and hoping that Ellen White could give them some light or shed some light on the matter. But what's interesting about it is just a few months before Ellen White dies, this exact question comes to Ellen White, and D.E. Robinson is the correspondent. And what's fascinating about it is that when D.E. Robinson corresponds about vaccination and Ellen White's opinion, he comes out and says that he could not get anything definitive from her. And then he goes on to give his opinion about vaccine and being favorable toward it. But while he ends up writing about being favorable toward vaccination, he ends up distinguishing his opinion from hers. And as a matter of fact, he ends up saying, you need to understand that this is my opinion and not Sister White's. And I'm paraphrasing it. But he made sure to distinguish his opinion from hers, and I think we miss that point today because when our leaders talk about it, they act as if the opinion that D.E. Robinson gave was in fact Ellen White's opinion, yet when D.E. Robinson's letter was written in 1915, he made it very clear that he says that all people do not see things alike in this matter. And in other words, he recognized that there are variances of opinion, and what we try to appeal to is the fact that there still are variances of opinion.
We're here at Wall Springs. This is actually a place that we enjoy coming to see sunsets and things like that. Historically speaking, Wall Springs is a place where, like other places here in Florida, that they would actually treat people. It's a freshwater spring that comes up from the ground, pumps hundreds of thousands of gallons directly into the Gulf of Mexico all the time. It's actually beautiful. The water's crystal clear, stays at the same temperature. In this area of Florida, there's a number of freshwater springs, and people were using these to actually treat people for sickness. It's fascinating that there was if you drove in, you will drive across a bicycle trail. Well, this bicycle trail was actually paved over a railroad track, and people would come from the northeast along that seaboard, and they would take the train all the way down here, and they would come here for a health resort. They would get their sunlight, they would get their fresh air, particularly in the winter. They would eat oranges, get their vitamin C up, get plenty of bioflavonoids, and they would also use hydrotherapy. And these weren't always Adventists. These were other people who saw the vision of hydrotherapy and how helpful it was. Now, what's interesting here is that today the spring still exists. The health retreat is long since gone. And now the government has actually built a boardwalk around it, and you can't even swim in it. This one place which was used to treat so many people, and people came down to receive the blessing of hydrotherapy, you can't even swim in it anymore. And it's kind of emblematic of what we see today. You see, we can go around, you can read the placards, and you can see the old postcards of how people would come here and get treatment and get well. And you could even read about doctors and how they advertise the water cure and all this other stuff. And it's just a relic of history. You can no longer use it, you can no longer swim in it, you can no longer partake in it. It's sort of forgotten and antiquated, as if we've moved on. Wall Springs is sort of emblematic of turning your back on a message of health and vitality, dealing with the simple treatments such as sunlight, fresh air, water, nutrition, and trusting in God.
So for anybody who's interested in purchasing this book, you can actually get it directly from our website. It's restoringtherightsthand.com.
There are some others that are carrying it. It can also be purchased digitally at Amazon.com. You will find it there. There's a lot of people who have rated it and been quite blessed, and so we're very thankful for all of that. Where are we going forward from here? Well, we have more projects to do. I think one of the things that we're looking at is examining other sacred cows in medicine, and we're going to write about those too. We really want to bring our physicians, our leaders together, and we want to ask ourselves, how can we get it right? How can we make our health message make a distinctive sound in the earth, not merely reflecting conventional wisdom or orthodox medicine, but a distinctive sound in the earth, because we don't have time. We need to agitate these principles and we need to start acting on them so souls can be won.